So thank you everyone for joining us for this session of the Big Ideas of Jewish Prayer. We're coming to the end of our series. We have two more after this. The next one will be talking about the Shema and Amidah, and really going into detail and trying and find personal meaning or strategies for personal meaning in them. And then the last one, we're pulling it all together. And I thought maybe what we could do is have a actual prayer service together as part of it, pray together and kind of have try and be together as a prayer community. As we've been talking about it, well, at a certain point you got to stop talking about it. You just do it. And so we'll be joining around the world of Marshall in Jerusalem if he's able to come to that one for
okay.
So today I want to get to a philosophical question of prayer, which I think is really deep and really important, and we really think about, or comes up a lot in our circles, you know, who daven with traditional liturgy, and dealing with our Siddur, which is so beautiful and wonderful, but comes from many different periods of Jewish history, and from periods when the Jewish people were at war, or periods of oppression, and just many different ideas are brought to the fore in it, and some that we resonate with immediately, and some that we resonate with less. And the big question is, well, what do you do with it? What do you do when you encounter something that doesn't speak to you? And so I'd like to ask if anybody has any moment when they're praying, specifically where something that they read comes up that they think at the back of their mind or at the fore, you know, I'm not sure if I agree with this, or I'm not sure what to do with this, or this doesn't seem relevant to me.
One thing, I hope not to jump the gun on the next session, which is the Shema and the Amidah, but there are questions I have with the second paragraph of the Shema. It's kind of this reward and punishment, very direct reward and punishment, which I'm intrigued with, but I also, you know, first of all, I don't take it literally, and I try to find meaning in this idea. If you do X, Y, and Z, then you'll be rewarded, and if you don't, you will be punished and banished from the land, etc., etc. So that's, you know, that's maybe more for next session, but that's a, you know, something that strikes me sometimes.
And to link nature to it, right? The rains will come. If you behave well, the rains will come. And if the rains aren't coming, you're being punished.
Right. That's great.
Black and white.
That's kind of crazy. Yeah. Another thing that bothers me is all the emphasis on Jews being the chosen people and having some special interaction with God.
Right. Thanks for not making me like those other people in the.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's and you know, some people struggle with that a lot. Other you know, a little bit less, but it's definitely one of the big ones that people talk about. And you know a little bit, but it's everywhere, right? It really is everywhere. I remember going, I might have shared this before, but going to a high holiday service in Jerusalem with my brother and my father, and we were just, it was at a minyan. There had great davening. It was Raz's minyan. I don't know if you've come across Raz Hartman, Marshall. Anyway, he does beautiful davening. Anyway, we just loved it, and we walked out. My father and I were loving it. My brother said, "Well, what?" He looked. We said, "It was great, wasn't it?" He said, "Oh, how could you say those things?" They said, "What do you mean?" You know, and we realized that, you know, we don't think about every line we say, and we just focus on what we like, and we like the singing, and you know, the rest we kind of don't put our mind on it. And he was, you know, he'd been many years since he'd been really focused on thinking about it, and he had trouble with it, and so it's a big question. What do you do? Anybody else? Any other prayers or parts?
There are places, I think, in the Amidah where it talks about the sacrifices and which we haven't done. We don't do sacrifice, haven't done sacrifices in 2,000 years. So that doesn't seem particularly meaningful to me.
Mhm.
Somewhat elite.
Restore the worship in the temple, right?
Right.
You know,
But
this is
but see, with our movement, even with the Siddur we
That
use here in
changed.
Israel,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah, there are changes. So, you know, the movement has kept Musaf, this Musaf service, but it
Mhm.
has changed it from more of an aspiration to a reflection of what we used to do.
What we used to do, because they changed the
And
tenses of the verbs.
I respect that. That's something that speaks to me.
So I think it really gets, and this is part of the discussion, I think it's really interesting, per movement, every movement has a different approach. In the conservative movement, we're willing to change, but less than, let's say, the reform movement. So for example, in the third to last prayer, we take out one word, Ishei Yisrael, right? We pray for the restoration of worship in the temple, but in an Orthodox, in the traditional Siddur, we pray for the restoration of the fires of Israel. What's the fire? The fire is the fire on the altar. But in conservative movement, we don't want to pray for an actual physical sacrifice. Well, not most of us. So we took out one word, which is the fires of Israel. But you see, for me, when I was used to praying it the other way before I started noticing it, and I had already in my mind changed the fires of Israel to like burning up everything that's wrong within us, not to the actual sacrifice. So I missed. But it's a big question. What do you do with prayers when you take it out? It's hard to put it back in. I was talking this morning with our teenagers at the synagogue. So the biggest things that the conservative movement have taken out are from the morning blessings, perhaps, right? We took out the blessing, the thanks. If you're a man in a traditional siddur, you say, thank you for not making me a woman. And if you're a woman, you said, thank you for making me as you intended, or, and then we changed it to thank you for making me in your image instead. And we used to say, in the traditional siddur we used to say, thank you, God, for not making me a goy. And now we say, thank you for making me Israel, which is a much more positive way of saying that. So those were two big changes that were made because they were just really felt not in resonance with where people were at. But the reform movement, for example, they took a much greater liberty to taking things out. They took out the whole second paragraph of the Shema and the second blessing of the Amidah, where we say Mechaye Hametim, who resurrects the dead or brings life to the dead, right? They didn't believe, they said, we don't believe in resurrection of the dead. It goes against our belief in a rational Judaism. So the reform movement took it out and changed it to resurrect everything. But interestingly enough, in their latest Siddur, after much thinking, they actually brought back Mechaye Hametim. It took a lot. It was very controversial and it was a big theological debate, but they brought it back because they felt it was general enough that it could be interpreted in all kinds of different ways. And the Reconstructionists, they're the ones who took out all the chosenness, right? So in the Reconstructionist Siddur, there's no chosenness. And when you have an Aliyah, you don't say Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Amim, who chose us from among the nations. And the Reconstructionist Siddur, you say Asher Kervanu Lavodatecha, who brought us close to your worship.
That's nice.
Yeah, so that's, there's a lot of changes, but they also changed because if you take away a chosenness, you change the Kiddush and you change Elaine, you change a lot. And so in the conservative movement, we change things slowly because we're worried once you take them out, it's not in your prayer book anymore, and in the reform movement to bring back those two words to the Amidah, that was a huge deal. And the conservative movement, we change things slowly because you never know. Then you want to bring things back and you have 3-4 generations, you have 2 generations, 3 generations of people who don't know those prayers, and you've taken out something. And we also do have a belief, a traditional belief in some sense, that a prayer is an address, right? It's almost like a spiritual formula that you say, and it connects you spiritually to something. And if you change it too much, then you're almost like playing with a formula. You're playing with a spiritual chemistry. If you change too much, then you don't have the spiritual jewel that was the result of the prayer. We're a little bit more reticent to change. And then, so what do you do when you've come to something, when you're praying, that doesn't speak to you, and that you say often, and that's a problem, and so one powerful way of doing it is either you just take it out, you don't say it. Another method, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, is called what I call transmuting. And transmuting is when you read it, but you don't take it literally, because you think the person, well, what you may think that the author didn't mean it completely literally. You try and get to the essence of it. And you're saying, well, how do I, from my point of view, try and take the general intention of that prayer, which was gratitude or courage, and bring it into a way that speaks to me. So I'm going to just do that bring up one prayer. And we'll go back to more discussion. But this is one that I think about when we come. This is from Hallel. So we're about to say this every day in Passover, over and over, towards the end of Passover, towards the end of the Hallel. It's one of the Psalms, Psalm 118. Alan, do you mind reading for us Psalm 118?
Sure. Can you enlarge it a bit?
Yeah.
Okay. All nations have beset me. By the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them down. They beset me, they surround me. By the name of the Lord, I will surely set them down. They have beset me like bees. They shall be extinguished like burning thorns. By the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them down.
So I don't know how that strikes other people when there are moments when, if there's a lot of, I'll admit, when there's a lot of terrorism in Israel or things are happening, and when there's a lot of war, it speaks to me a little bit more. But in general, it's very harsh. I don't want to pray to harm even my enemies, even our enemies, and almost in any way, but in such a way is hard.
Look at the Russian soldiers in the Ukraine. I mean, most of them are fighting a war that they're not really fighting. They're fighting a war that they think is right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or that they just don't have a choice, or conscripts,
They don't have a choice, right?
But and even if we were to pray, even if there is a place to pray, at least in my mind, to pray, for a victory over enemies, I'm not sure if I were to compose that this would be the language that I would use.
No.
So what do you do? So what do we do? This is part of the Hallel. You say this a lot, So one, I'll share with you one thing that I do when I pray this prayer, which I think is probably somewhat common. I transmute the meaning from being about external enemies to being about it in my own internal enemies. And my own internal enemies in some ways are even more like bees than external enemies. Are really external enemies like bees? It's more like your internal, enemies, which can be like bees, in which I pray that they shall be extinguished. I don't know if anyone else has ever had that thought or transmuted a prayer in that way.
Well, it's certainly a good idea. They just make me mad when I get to those things.
But this is one way, because he's talking about asking for God for strength in a difficult situation. And so since he's talking about enemies, I can pray to God for strength against my own internal enemies, the parts of all the chametz that we're thinking about that I want to clear because it's Passover, the the chametz in my own heart and my own mind, which I'm clearing as I'm thinking about preparing for the holiday. And I'm praying for God for that, and that's something that I can do without changing a psalm. Psalms are beautiful, and I don't want to remove a psalm from Hallel, which has been prayed by Jews for thousands of years. And this is a way for me to say it. And what I want to get to as we move forward. Anybody else have any thoughts about this psalm, this piece of the psalm that we prayed during Hallel?
And the other thing is to think back to, what the time when this would have been written,
Mhm.
and to think about from our time of comfort, even though there are, there's increasing anti-Semitism, but it's still a very comfortable life. And we forget we can forget what our ancestors over the centuries experienced.
Exactly. And thinking about biblical times, this is for a psalm. You lived in a village somewhere on the border with one of Moab, one of the neighbors of Israel, and they could come pillage your village and kill and plunder at any moment. And this this psalm might feel very close to what to your reality. They're surrounding you, and you're praying for God for strength in war to be able to cut them down. So and so you can have maybe understanding of where that come from, and then use your own power of commentary to make it connect to who you are. And what I want to get to now is just how close this is to Judaism, right? This is something that Judaism does very authentically throughout everything that we do. And I've talked about this before. I was once at an interfaith seminar that was week-long in Connecticut, and there were Muslims and Christians and Jews, and one of the days was talking about our difficult texts, right? So the Muslim contingent brought up a text that called for jihad against non-Muslims and talked about how they dealt with that text. And the Christians brought, one of the Gospels that talked about how the Jews in that Gospel are the ones who keep telling Pontius Pilate to kill Jesus. And he says, do you really want to kill Jesus? And the Jews say, yes, him, he's the one we want. And it's not present in all the Gospels, but is in one. And they talk about how they deal with it. And then for us, we brought, from the book of Numbers, when Moses is commanded and then commands the people to wipe out the nation that had attacked us and tried to lure the people into idol worship and to completely destroy them. And for us, when we were talking about it, we said, well, this is a problematic text in our tradition, but very few Jews read that in the Torah and think, if any, we need to go out there and do this right now, because we have thousands of years of commentary on top of it. Jews just have this. We build commentary on top of everything we do, and the commentary becomes as real as the text itself in some ways. And that's just one of the beauties of our tradition, is that we talk about it. We're willing to ask questions, and we have comment over thousands of years, and we see things through those lens. We don't see the lens just through annihilating other nations, as the Torah commands, except for a few extremists. There are some Jewish extremists who do have that, but doesn't happen very often. This is very authentic, and even prayer itself. So let's get to our next few sources. Will somebody read from Pirkei Avot? This is one of the very important sayings from Pirkei Avot.
Shimon the righteous was one of the last of the men of the great assembly. He used to say, the world stands upon three things: the Torah, the temple service, and the practice of acts of piety.
Beautiful, thank you. So the world stands on three things, but what happens when one of those three things is no longer possible? The temple service, right? Does the world stop standing? So we go to the next. Please continue, Ed.
To love Hashem and to serve him with all your heart. What service is done with the heart? You must say this tefillah. This is tefillah. This is prayer.
And the next one, please, the Midrash.
Who does teshuvah is as if he went up to Yerushalayim and he built the Beit HaMikdash temple and built the Mizbeach, the altar, and brought all of the karbanot, the sacrifices, in the Torah.
Yeah. That's a pretty powerful comment on what sacrifices were, right? We're talking before about sacrifices. 2,000 years ago, the rabbis were already saying that just to do tshuva, just to ask for forgiveness, is like bringing all the sacrifices. We're already commenting on top of something that doesn't speak to us anymore, is now possible, and reinterpreting it in a different way, right? This is something that's very speaks to Judaism. Go ahead. Judy, were you about to say something?
No, I just said that I really like that. That's
Mhm.
very nice. That's a very good attitude.
It's nice to have that flexibility, right? I mean, if you think about it, it must have taken a lot of chutzpah to say that originally, right? You're willing to reinterpret one of the pillars of Judaism and say that just to ask for forgiveness is going to give you, to do tshuva, to return to yourself, is as if you'd done everything in the temple. And even prayer itself, right? The idea that we transmuted the sacrifices into prayer. Prayer itself is not what it was originally intended. We've talked about this before. I mean, that's also, it takes a lot of chutzpah to do that. You know, the way we did it is by, in some ways, preserving much of the original form. The Shacharit service is named after the Shacharit offering. The Musaf offering. All of these. So we preserved the times of the offering. So we preserved a lot of the original service that was in the temple, the worship in the temple. We just transmuted it to make it into something that spoke to us more, which was prayer from the heart. And so that was a pretty big change. If you think about it, that we transmuted the sacrificial system and turned it into something else. So when we're doing this, we're really working within something that's within our tradition, which doesn't exist in other traditions in the same way. You know, Christianity, you have to go through a lot more of a theological, conference or battles to change something. And in Islam, they have a lot more trouble reinterpreting something that's in the Quran. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's not quite a transmutation, but on the same subject, I believe from what I remember, we were in great fear when we changed the Torah Shabbat al-Peh, and we wrote it down. And so in that way, I think, to me at least, it was a spirit of kind of, one is preservation. In that case, is we didn't want to lose the essence of it. But when we don't have the temple, we had to find some way to honor that commandment too. So we transmuted it into prayer. So we've always been evolving to that sense, in my mind.
Thank you. Yeah, and with the fact that we have the oral Torah itself allows us to transmute things, because we believe we don't just have a written Torah, we have an oral Torah, and this is the oral Torah, and the oral Torah is really infinite. So you're always able to reinterpret the written Torah. Someone else was about to say something. So the way that we do it in so many different places, but one of the most famous is, right, in the Torah, it says, you shall stone the rebellious son. And I don't think we do much stoning of rebellious children anymore. The rabbis reinterpreted it by saying, well, for them to be rebellious, they will have had to drink, so many liters of wine and eat in so much horrible, meat, and they will have had to do it between 12 and a half and 13. And so, we reinterpret things. We always keep the original, which is what transmuting is, right? We don't just throw away everything, but we build a sense of reading it through a different lens. That's how we do it, because we feel the old is powerful. And that's it's a big part of the conservative movement too, right? Tradition and changes. We don't change so easy. We keep the tradition, but because we feel the tradition is powerful. And once you throw out too much of a tradition, there's not much left anymore. And so, thank you, God, who didn't make me a woman, that we want to take out because there's not much way to save that, right? That's a hard thing to save. So that we took out, but many other things are there, and our Siddur has a lot, and some of it is stuff that's we don't agree with, that's theologically problematic, and some of it is just we don't speak to it, and so I think transmuting is really one of the key tools that has to be used when working with a traditional Siddur. And we're going to come to a few examples, but anybody have any comments or thoughts or questions before we move on? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just had one quick one. It was a point of curiosity. Did the Reform movement change the mezuzah if they took out the second paragraph of the Shema?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Well, does the mezuzah have the second paragraph of the Shema in it? I'm not sure. It might only have the first paragraph. What is
Does it?
this moment?
It's really small. The piece of
Okay.
paper
So
is
it doesn't-
really small.
Parchment.
Parchment, yeah. It's really
But
small.
in the tefillin definitely has the second paragraph, and I don't think they take it out there.
Yeah.
Does the Reform use tefillin?
they used-
Well, until recently they didn't, but they're becoming more traditional.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example of where you run into what happens when you take things out. So, for example, we were building an online service with Oak Park Temple last year, and we wanted to, we were going to put on the screen passages from the liturgy so people could follow along, and they had everything ready online to put into the service to read. When we got to we were a conservative and a Reformed synagogue doing together, so I wanted to have the second paragraph of the Shema, but they didn't have any copy digitally of the second paragraph of the Shema because they don't use it. So we had to scramble to find that, and we had to reformat it and make it look like the others. And once you've taken it out, it's much harder to put it back in. And when you put it back in, all of their people are like, "What's that?" Where did that come from? And what and so it's interesting when you come to that. It's hard when you change. When you change something, it creates dissonance with other movements. But then again, look, the Orthodox movement will say to us, you changed some things that we just are not willing to change either. So it's all. We're all grappling with this question. In some ways, this question is one of the biggest questions that separates the movements. What are you willing to change, and what do you transmute? So let's go forward. And first, we're going to get to a few examples. The first example we're looking at is something which I don't think is theologically problematic, but which is is not so relevant to most of our lives. This is from the first of the morning blessings, the Birchot HaShachar, Baruch Atah Hashem. Blessed are you, Asher Natan LaServi Bina Lavchin Ben Yom Uben Laila, who gave the rooster understanding to distinguish day from night. So I don't know about you, but I don't have a rooster who wakes me up in the morning. Over the fall, we spent a weekend at a farm, and the roosters were crowing, and I'd forgotten this, I guess, but they don't just crow once, right? They crow for 2 hours straight.
Yeah.
So when you wake up, you really wake up. And
Yeah,
so,
we used to go to a farmy sort of place in Galena, and the cows and the roosters would wake you up. It's kind of fun.
And so, when you're a farmer, you might thank the rooster for waking you up because you have all your farming duties, but even if you live on a farm and you're not, you might not want to wake up at 5:30 in the morning to go and do everything. So what do you do with this prayer? I mean, it's the first of the morning blessings. What do you do with it?
I think it's adorable. I mean, it just reminds people that we come from where we come from. I mean, we didn't all live in cities all the time.
Phil, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I've been lurking because I wasn't sure if I would be suddenly leaving. And thank you all. But I actually, Judy Sachs, I think, said something very close to what I wanted to say, because I think it's I like it very much. I understand that what exactly the Sech actually was is some matter of controversy, but it's some kind of bird, right? And just the idea that we live in a universe where there are other creatures with enough understanding or response to the world they live in and that we live in to distinguish day from night. I would not like to give that up either.
Yeah, I would not like to replace rooster with alarm clock or.
So Phil, what Phil was doing, he transmuted it to some degree, because he talked about who gives animals other than us the ability to distinguish. So that's kind of like a little meditation on the original, right? That's a little meditation. You're expanding. It's not just thank you for the rooster waking me up, but you're talking about thank you, God, for giving meaning, for giving understanding to other animals.
I would be happy to see it that way, but that wasn't really my sense of it. I think it doesn't say anything about waking us up, you know, and maybe that's what they had in mind. And I have read somewhere that this bird, this Sech V, may have been the rooster or the cock, or may have been something else. But just I guess you're right that I hadn't thought of it in terms of transmutation. But I thought of it as very concrete and direct. But I guess that all depends on the starting point that you have toward the text.
Well, the blessings were originally said when you woke up, right? You woke up, the rooster crow, you woke up, and then you said the other 9 blessings as you got up and you straightened your back and all those things.
Oh yes, I take your point completely, and I never had the practice or the discipline. And my grandfather, my father's father, used to be beaten with a leather belt, according to him, when he didn't get up to late fill-in early enough in the morning. So I have a lot of different complicated feelings about this, but it's true that it makes more logical sense in the context in which you put it. I have nothing more. Yeah.
It goes back to Bereshit also, and the creation of the world and the separation of light and darkness. It's another way to look at it.
Exactly. And when I'm thinking about it, when I'm present enough, I try and bring up stuff like that too. I take kind of somewhere between UK and Phil, and I think, you know, thank God I live in a world where I have the understanding to distinguish between day and night, a world that makes sense, right? The God separated day and night, and I live in a world where there's, you know, I'm able to make sense of it. You know, that's a powerful thought for me when I have that in the morning. And it's not the original meaning, but I'm kind of drashing on it and transmuting it in my mind to increase the meaning that it gives to me as I say it. And is that where you're going to go with that, Kay, in terms of like?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the creator is the one that made a difference between night and day, and that we can recognize that and understand it. And, you know, we're not always in the darkness. There's a period of light that comes after that.
Beautiful. I love that too, right? There's, even though we have darkness, the light will come at the end of it. And that's maybe the sun is rising. That's a beautiful thing to think about when you say it. I would encourage anybody, if you wake up in the morning and you say the morning blessings with those kinds of thoughts behind them, they are so powerful. And to some degree, I think that's the work to be done with prayer in general, to make them yours. Now that's one that you transmute, because I just wanted to share this morning when I was teaching this to the teens. They were saying, you know what, I don't have a rooster, but my mom wakes me up. So thank you, God, for giving my mom who has the understanding to distinguish between day or night. I'm not sure if they're saying that sarcastically or not. So I want to get to one that's more controversial now. And this is one that I think about, but a story that comes with it. One of my teachers, Rabbi Adir for rabbinical school, who's a great teacher in the movement. And when he was at the seminary and he was Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, wasn't teaching as often anymore, but he would come every now and then to do a shiur. And, you know, on Rosh Chodesh, the new month, there'd be a celebratory breakfast after Minyan. And one morning he came to teach and they sang Birkat HaMazon, as they always do. And at the end of them, he admonished them when they sang Na'ar ha'iti v'gam zakanti v'lo ha'iti tzadik ne'ezav. I was young and now I'm old and I've never seen a righteous person abandoned. And Mordechai, Rabbi Kaplan said to them, if you don't believe it, don't say it. Right? He's the founder of the Reconstructionist movement, the one who took out all the chosenness stuff, which he didn't believe in. But that was his mantra. If you don't believe it, don't say it. And he admonished everybody there. You know, why do you say this? So we sing this, and there's beautiful melodies that go with this, depending what time of day you sing it on Shabbos too. There's all kinds of melodies. So I was young, and now I am old, and I've never seen a righteous person abandoned. Anybody noticed that before, or had trouble with that, or thought about it?
I never noticed that.
Well, people go through that so quickly, it's hard to keep track of it.
I guess there are two ways of. There are two ways that I understand people talk about it, because it's obviously, I mean, and it goes on further, right? Nor have I seen his seed begging for bread, his child begging for bread, or yeah.
There's a verse from Psalms, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, and it's a psalm. It's a psalm. I know it's in the morning psalms in the on Shabbos. I don't know about the other days because I haven't been doing them, but it's right in there. So it's very strong. It's very counterfactual, if you like. And I take it there are two ways of looking at it. That, I mean, traditionally, and one of them is, I think of as a kind of a litvisha, very stern way that's been shown, that if you haven't, if you are, you're not a righteous one. That you're not a tzaddik if you're in want, which is a terrible and outrageous idea, and contrary to some biblical texts and to our common experience, I would say. But so when people sing and just sing la 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 for that verse, when I first heard that at a Shabbos table, a lunch table, I thought they were saying that because it's clearly contrary to fact. But then I was told they're saying it so as not to draw attention to those among them who are actually in want. Is that the case, Rabbi?
As you said, there is that school of thought that takes in a very stark way, and I had not heard that the singing was because of that, but that's it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure, which comes first, the singing or the theological idea and where you sing it, but it's true, you sing a lot. That's where you sing la 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 at the end, but it's also the end of Birkat HaMazon. So, it comes to mind, Chabad actually took that out. Chabad, out of their liturgy, took out Na'ar Haiti because they just don't believe in it. And Chabad is interesting because Chabad is very, very, very orthodox, but they also have their own. They feel a lot of divine ordained power to their rabbi, their rabbis, to make changes when needed, and don't make a lot of changes. They have made some changes, and they've taken out that verse. And actually, earlier in the week, I was talking about this with my father. I'm like, well, is that just in all of Nusach Ha'ari? Nusach Ha'ari is the Hasidic Nusach, And we looked it up, and as far as we could tell, it's only Chabad who took out the line, and the rest of Hasidim do say it. So it's a Chabad's thing. They took it out because I guess they felt this wasn't right.
Not right.
So it's not true. It's just not true to our experience. One way of looking at it is that this is what I transmuted to, and I invite anybody else has other ideas, that it's aspirational. That we're partners with God to not let anybody go hungry. And then, this verse is actually not just this verse, but what do we say at the end of this first paragraph of the Birkat Hamazon that we sing with so much gusto? Hazan et hakol, right? Who sustains everybody, right? That's not true. We know it's not true. Not everybody gets sustained, by people die of hunger every day throughout our world, and there's great famines, and that's been true forever. So what do we mean when we sing Hazan et hakol? So for me, it bothers. So the way in my mind, I have to have a commentary in my mind that I'm one place removed from the original text where I think it's aspirational. We're partners with God to make that happen because anybody have any other thoughts on that?
I have a question about it. I thought Hazan et hakol, I was just looking for it. I can't find it right away. I thought that was sustains everything rather than everybody. That is, rather than every individual person. I thought it was everything in the world. Is that wrong?
No, it's true. It is true.
So in that case, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I would just say, in that case, what it's saying is that there's a power, they say God, who sustains the world, without whom it doesn't exist or it can't go on. That kind of thing, rather than that that everybody gets enough to eat or something of that sort.
It's true, but it comes at the end of the paragraph which says, "Hu noten lechem lechol basar," right? Who gives bread to all flesh.
Oh, yes, I see your point.
But you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take a wider and it's easier to deal with. But the Psalm for Rosh Chodesh, right, which you say God is giving everybody what they need, every animal, everything. It's beautiful. My favorite Psalm, right? Everything gets what it needs.
Yeah, I stand corrected. I think it's very helpful. Thank you.
So, so even if you take a wider, but there are animals who don't. But so so you can play with it. And that's the way I usually, just the God on some level gives everybody sustenance, a kind of divine sustenance. But that paragraph is pretty literal, right? That paragraph is, you get what you need, and it's not always true. But you've just eaten a meal with bread, which is why you say Birkat Hamazon. So I guess it applies to you at that moment. But it's a little self-centered to say God gives bread to everything while you're eating bread, but others aren't. But so I don't know, what do you do when you're singing these words? I think most people just ignore it because there's a sentiment of gratitude which kind of permeates all of it, and that's beautiful. Or they're just singing the melody and loving the melody. But if you're thinking about it, what do you do? So I think one way is, like I was saying, you transmute it to be aspirational and you put yourself in it. And I aspire to be in partnership with God. Marshall, were you about to say something?
Yeah, that's the Nahai verse is very, you're right, it is very controversial, because if you read the English translation in different Birkonim, they're very, very different. I don't have them in front of me, but people struggle with that verse to give it like I guess a transformational meaning in English. But there's also a tradition I heard that I learned that when singing it, when chanting it, some people will leave out a word. Will be silent during one or two words of that pasuk, reflecting the fact that they don't agree with it, and therefore they don't say the whole pasuk.
Beautiful. And I think that happens a lot. So for example, I'll give you one example where I know people who do this in different ways. But even in the Kiddush, the time when everybody sings the loudest is Kivanuva, who chose us from all nations. I know people who don't agree with chosenness, and they don't sing that power everybody else to sing out the loudest, or they'll just fudge one word instead of Mikol Amim, Im Kol Amim, who chose us with all the nations. Some people will sing instead of from all the nations, and they fudge that word, and
I don't like that.
okay. So it's, you know, because we all have to deal with this when you're dealing with a traditional text that you want to keep on some level. What do you do with it? You just don't sing a word. I remember when I was in Jerusalem in yeshiva, and we came to the blessing of the Shmona Esrei, of the morning blessings, where you say you ask God to uproot and destroy and the informers. And there's a tradition among some people. They would say that prayer in a much lower voice. They didn't feel they had the ability to take it out, but they would say it in a much lower voice than the other prayers, because they didn't want to be praying really loudly to destroy other people. So this is all different. Go ahead. It's something that's very commonplace in Judaism to have all those different ways, and I think that, in fact, if you really think about how much of it is there in the prayer book, I find transmuting in some ways is the easiest way to deal with things that are not super challenging. But when they're very challenging, you either have to remove them or not say them. But I find that by transmuting, which is building another layer of meaning to it. So when I say Nar Haiti, I love singing the melody to it. So I don't want to stop singing those words. That's just not what I personally do. So in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, I want to get to that place where do my little bit as best I can. We're not great at this, but this weekend, Rachel and I, we baked 2 lasagnas to give to homeless people as part of a Good Deeds Day for JUF. So we did our little bit this weekend. I wish we could do a lot more often to try and you know, do something to help not see people abandoned and have food to eat. You know, Birkat Hamazon is all about food. So you know, it's aspirational that with God's help we can come to that place of everyone having food. And you know, I often think about, we do live in a world where we could feed every single person, right? We do live in that world. We just don't, out of the way our world is built. That's just the way our world is. There is enough food to feed every single person in the world. It just doesn't happen. So go ahead. So I want to conclude with a final one, which is another way of changing a prayer you don't agree with, which some people have started adding, right? This is Oseh Shalom Bimromav, which is at the end of every Kaddish, so it comes up so often. And this is in our new Sidurim, something that's been around already for some decades, but we finally got put down on this Sidur, but it's not in Sim Shalom. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael V'Kol Yoshvei Tevel.
You know, who would dwell on earth, right? That's very
right,
nice.
and to all who dwell on earth, and let us say Amen. So it's interesting, on our morning minyan, some people have started saying it and other people don't say it. And it kind of creates a little bit moment of dissonance, which is a little tiny bit uncomfortable maybe, but it's maybe holy dissonance. But it's you know, it's nice to have a place where you can pray for not only Jews. On the other hand, some people say, well, this is the traditional prayer, I don't want to change it. So what do you do when you come to now you have that option? And so it's easier to add than to take out, but it still creates a little bit of controversy when you get to it. Ed, have you been noticing that?
Yeah, in fact, I sometimes add that in when I'm when I'm leading the service, at least for the last one before the Elena.
And Marshall, what happens in the Masorti congregations in Israel? You're on mute.
The one I go to Mayano, it's included.
It's included.
It's in the Siddur. It's not in brackets, and I'd say 9 out of 10 times the Shaliach Tzibor includes it.
Okay, interesting.
So it's kind of, it's kind of natural and accepted.
Well, the Masorti movement Siddur in some ways is more progressive than than our Siddurim here in America. There's a lot of more things that have been added or made optional throughout it. But what do people think about this? Anybody have any thoughts? Is it hard for anyone to change something they've been singing or saying for decades a certain way?
No,
Well,
that's something that's always really irritated me, that we should be praised only to Israel. So I think this is wonderful.
To me, it's like in Sim Shalom in the in the service, Sim Shalom in the I believe in the Lev Shalom, and I believe in the earlier Siddur as well that used at Har Zion. It's Sim Shalom Ba'olam.
Exactly.
Is that right? For the
Yeah.
And that's taken from Saja Gaon. At least that's what it says there. So that means that one of the earliest people to put together a complete Siddur, at least that's what we're told. I don't know if that was his concern or not, but to me it's fascinating. And there he found a hook. They find a hook in Jewish tradition for doing that and not treating it as an innovation. And on the other hand, this is not a criticism of the cantor, but Stewart hasn't worked that into the singing of it, as far as I can say. It's
The other thing that often gets left out is the foremothers, which, I thought it was wonderful when they put it in, and yet it doesn't always get sung that way.
Well, we do sing it every Amidah. We do sing with the foremothers. And we don't. The only, the foremothers have been added somewhere else too. But that was just to bring back the other side for 1 second. I also, when I lead, I bring the foremothers, obviously, because I believe in it. But there is a sense of a blessing that's been said a certain way for thousands of years, and it's not, in the conservative movement, when they changed that blessing and added the foremothers, it was a lot of resistance because they felt there was a power to how you say it. It's kind of like a spiritual formula. It's almost like spiritual chemistry, and suddenly you're adding things to something that's very. Imagine if you change the Shema, right? The Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We're so used to saying, if you change that would be really hard for, I think, a lot of us to make it more, even if it's something we believed in, it's a big tension, right? And for some things, it's just easier to include them in your mind. You're not ready, you don't want to change them because you feel you're changing something that's a jewel and that's powerful in its own right. So it's
the language from the burning bush, and that makes it so powerful. And so I find it very, very difficult. Actually, it was very radical in a sense. But in the burning bush, right? I am the God of your fathers, and then he lists them just the way we do it.
Exactly that, and I agree. It's very, very, very hard because we don't always realize it, but these things come from somewhere. So, for example, that language Amidah comes from the burning bush, and other parts of it come from other parts of prophets, Ha'el, Hagadol. So there's all these different allusions that go back to moments and everything, and we want to change them because we want to make them fit where we are. But it's hard when you change something that's a formula that we believe is revealed, revelation, or even if you don't, revealed by God, or even if you don't reveal by God, revealed by some, the author of, if you want to take it that place. I mean, I do believe that the burning bush story is personally real, and a lot of it was taken there. And so I to change that is hard. Or to change some other part is, do you remove the power of it by changing the language? So it's a really big question, and that's why I use transmuting. I think transmuting is so powerful for so many prayers, to add layers of meaning to things that are challenging. And
also, since Hebrew is a gendered language, the word avot, which they use for fathers or forefathers could also be used for a mixed group of males and females. So I just think of that as ancestors without having to, yeah, and being inclusive of men and women.
Thank you. And then even more so, banim, sons can be in some ways even more used in that sense. But it is a gendered language, and
You say
go ahead.
name to include sons and daughters in Hebrew.
Yeah.
You usually use the masculine plural to include a mixed group in Hebrew.
Biblical, it seems like that was often the case. Yeah. To include all children.
And when I was putting together the Yisker book last year, I went to find a genderless prayer, because it's things you say for your mother and things you say for your father, but there was nothing that you say for your parents, nothing anywhere that I could find that was for your parents. That was a little strange.
Yeah.
It's a very gendered, it's a gender language, and grammatically everything is gendered, so it's hard to, I've seen attempts, and there are obviously lots of attempts that exist and that have been done, but it can start to sound a little bit strange when you do so. I mean, there's a value to it for sure, but it can, I had colleagues in rabbinical school who didn't want to say, he created the world, Z created the world. But I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do Z. It sounded too strange to me. But we all have different levels of comfort. But I just, maybe to conclude, go back to this idea of all of these different methods that we do, and the gratitude for a tradition that allows us to do it in some ways. It gives us the freedom to not say, you can just not sing a word or fudge it, but also the power of transmutation, because there's so many places in the Siddur where we don't feel it's relevant to our lives, or all you have to do is add some layers of meaning. The rooster, not just forefathers, or that's one where maybe we do want to change, but so many places where you can change the meaning with adding your commentary in your own head, and that, I believe, even if when you say it, you're not thinking about it, there's some little place in your brain that's got that commentary and the thought is going through there, and you're still praying it in that way. And I think that allows us to pray traditional prayers in a way that's still authentic to our beliefs, and that and also creates a personal connection to that prayer because you spend time thinking about it, and it makes it all the more rich. Thanks everybody for joining us. 2 more sessions.